Welcome to another episode of the SUP FM podcast. This season is all about adventure and accessibility, and in this episode I speak to Bruce Kirkby. This Starboard Dream Team rider has spent a lifetime adventuring across the world, sharing his experiences as a TV host, journalist, writer, photographer and filmmaker. In this episode, he shares his insights into expedition planning, the importance of choosing the right equipment, and the value of human connection in the face of adversity. So I hope you enjoy my chat with adventurer, author, and Starboard Dream Team rider, Bruce Kirkby. Bruce, a huge welcome to the SUP FM podcast.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for having me.
And where am I speaking to you now?
So I live in Kimberley now, which is in the interior mountains of BC. It's a tiny little mining town, one traffic light. The mine's actually closed, but it's a quiet little corner of the interior BC. And we're on the cusp between, like, paddling's just shutting down. There's ice on the shores of the lakes, and there's not enough snow to ski, but that could change tomorrow.
Well, I said to you off air before we started recording that I had been doing my research on this, and I know that Kimberley's a stunning place and epic for adventure sports and skiing and mountain biking, and you've got stunning mountains and water too. But everyone listening to this will also know that Kimberley also has the largest freestanding cuckoo clock in the world, which I'm sure everyone already knows.
So we had a huge mine, and in fact it was a lead zinc mine, and it's appropriate today because we're talking on Remembrance Day, that supplied the majority of lead that went into munitions during the Second World War, and but it was slated to close down in 2001, and there was a wonder if the town could survive. And so about 30 years out, the village elders were concerned, and they decided to Bavarianize town. I don't think there was a German person living in town. Within a year, everyone in every business was wearing lederhosen and drindle, and all the facades were up. We got the cuckoo clock. We have a town mascot called Happy Hans, which is a kind of drunk lederhosen wearing miner. So yeah, we are a bit of a unique place.
Excellent, and so good of you to wear the lederhosen today for this recording.
Go to seed, yeah.
Obviously, you were there early on during the SUP journey, and you've done a lot of gritty expeditions. As I mentioned, you're a Starboard Dream Team rider, and you work with Starboard in innovation by designing new adventure boards, and all things that I want to chat about with you a bit later on. But first, could you just tell us about how you got into SUP, because you're also an experienced paddler across a number of other disciplines, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, the really short background before SUP was I graduated in engineering. I grew up in Toronto, and interestingly, I was not, the kid who you would think was good at English or art or sports. Like back then, gym class was like Lord of the Flies. Basically the shirts and skins, and people pick the teams. There's always one left in the center, and they're like, "Yeah, you take Bruce this week." No, we had him last week. You got to take him. So anyway, I was really good in math and science, and I went to school to study engineering physics, the geekiest of all disciplines. But I love the outdoors. And so when you said I came to SUP with a long adventure background, there'd been about 30 years post-university. I mean, I went straight up to the Yukon after university, guided rafts and canoes on those big northern rivers. And that led to bigger and bigger expeditions around the world, kind of out there, stuff, buying camels and riding across Arabia. And, a lot of paddling. I've always been a water-based guy, sea kayaking, big whitewater kayaking and rafting. And so it was about 10, 12 years ago now that an Olympic gold medalist wrote to me and said, "Hey, I'd really like to raise some money for children in Africa who don't have clean drinking water. And I want to do it by paddling a SUP from Vancouver to Victoria. It's a big open water crossing." SUPs were totally new then. I was kind of aware of them. I'd stood on one once in Maui when I was surfing, and it was just like really twitchy. And I wrote back to him and said, "Look, I will tell you everything you need to know," because I knew about tides and all the inside passage. But the only thing is I have to come with you. And he said, of course. And then his wife said, "This is way too dangerous. You can't do this." So I went and did it myself. And that was the start of as soon as I got a SUP, I bought an inflatable. I just ordered it online. It showed up. I took it out to the lake behind my house. And It sounds cliche. I just fell in love. Like there's something about standing on it that maybe it's that little proprioceptive balance, but there was, it's that meditative freedom. I just was in the moment. I'd done a lot of sitting things. Like I'd sat in rafts, I'd sat in kayaks and canoes, and now I was up higher. I could see deeper into the water. And I just paddled every single piece of body of water, river, lake, creek around my house. We had a 2-hour drive in the first few years. And then I started growing from there. But that was the start.
And you mentioned that trip. So it was a 100k paddle, wasn't it, from Victoria, which is south of Vancouver Island, to Vancouver City. That was the first adventure that really started you off. And as you said, that's a pretty complex first trip, really. I mean, albeit the fact that obviously you've got all of your water experience before, because where that works is you've got islands and rocky outcrops, you've got aggressive tidal conditions. I'm presuming that water sort of funnels through between the island there, and you've also got the added complication that you could be drifting down across the border into the US if you time it wrong as well.
There was quite a bit going on, and the crux move was crossing Georgia Strait, which was actually the place we went across was about 26k, and it howled all day. I was like, I can't paddle across this, and I was with a buddy who was in a kayak who was shooting some video, and we figured the latest we could leave was 6 o'clock because we knew it'd be pitch black by 10. And at that point, I was on this 12.6 sup. I was paddling about 6.2k an hour, and at 6 o'clock the wind died. But there is a huge current in the middle of Strait of Georgia, and all the shipping container ships come down there, and they come really fast. They're traveling at 20 knots. And so we had to get clearance from like air traffic control to go. I covered my hat in tinfoil in the hope that it would be more reflective. But the thing was, the sun was setting directly north, like right where the ships were coming from. So you couldn't see a thing. Yeah. And there were these big upwellings of current, like kind of 50-foot wide pans of water would come swelling up from the bottom, and you go sliding one way or the other. But we made it across, and obviously we thought carefully about what we needed to do. But there were a few little intricacies in that trip for sure.
Yeah. So that didn't put you off at all, and in no particular order. I mean, just going through some of your adventures, this might not be the peaks for you, but one of your other adventures was circumnavigating Cape Scott, which is up on the northwest of Vancouver and Islands. And for those who don't know that stretch, it's a pretty isolated and wild stretch of coastline, isn't it? And you managed to do that within a very particular weather window between fronts, but that wasn't altogether straightforward either, was it?
No, and so what's happened was I about 4 years after I began doing a lot of sup paddling, I was presenting at a kind of a ski and snowboard festival in Whistler, and there was a fellow sharing the stage with me, really gentle guy in a plaid shirt, understated, and we started talking. He'd been doing a bunch of paddling, and he grew into an incredible expedition partner. His name's Norm Hahn, and we'll probably talk about Norm more as the chat goes on. But Cape Scott was Norm and I's second trip, but essentially over the last 10 years, Norm and I have been really stitching together almost the entire BC coast, kind of doing more difficult. There's all these headlands on the coast that stand out as iconic and dangerous and difficult for sailors. So when you're on a sup, it's a big commitment. So we've learned together. Cape Scott was the first. The next year we went around the Brooks Peninsula, and then year after that around Cape Caution. And the thing that had been in the back of our mind was crossing Hecate Strait, which is a really big body of water that separates the Queen Charlotte Islands offshore from the mainland. And traditionally, it's why the Haida Nation. So the Haida Nation is one of the kind of really iconic West Coast First Nations in Canada, with a very strong and flourishing culture, pre-contact and now post-contact, and they have continued to have an extraordinary presence on that island. But what protected them was the fact they could cross Hecate Strait and no one could chase them back, because it's a big body of water. At its narrowest, it's in a straight line. It's about 65K. It's huge tidal currents, huge winds, lots of complicating factors, waves coming, big swell coming from the north and the south. And so Environment Canada rates it the single most dangerous body of water on the entire Canadian coast, fourth most dangerous in the world. So it's in the kind of league of things of, Cape Horn or any of these big points. And so Norman and I had watched that, and it requires very particular conditions, but we got across that last summer. And so we continue to do more and more challenging trips together.
Yeah, that's incredible. And, when you're going around places like Cape Caution, I mean, the clue's in the name, isn't it, really? And as you said, it'd be good to explore, your relationship with Norm, because it's definitely a partnership that seems to work really well. And I've been enjoying like your videos together as you've been off on your trip. It's really important to have a partner that you can really trust and rely on in these sort of experiences. So as a podcast which is sponsored by Starboard, I think it's okay to talk a little bit about quality and innovation. And I know that you got together with Sven and Ollie O'Reilly to scratch an itch that you had for quite some time about developing an effective adventure board. So how did you come across Starboard, and how did you initially make that contact with them?
Yeah, so that first fellow who invited me was interested in paddling across from Victoria to Vancouver with me was on a Starboard at the time. I'd never heard of it. I went out and trained with him. It was, I think, 23 wide, and I was on a 30 wide. I'm like, wow, that thing's tippy. But as I began to understand the unique needs of expedition coastal paddling, I started looking around, and the board that caught my eye was the Starboard Tandem, which is 16 by 32. And I've done a lot of big trips on that board. And that's not what it's designed for. I've added tie downs to it, but it's allowed me to handle huge loads. You'll have upwards of 100 pounds of gear on the deck. If you're going for a long trip, you're carrying fresh water for sections of the ocean. And it really allows me, I'm 6'4", so the board size fits me, and it handles big water incredibly well. So that I actually reached out to Starboard way back in the day and said, look, I'm going to try to paddle around a section of Vancouver Island. And they're like, oh, we're happy to try to help you. We can give you a pro deal or something. So this board came. And I paddled it for a while. And then I got in touch with Starboard Canada. I can't remember how it happened. And I was with them for a little bit, and they were very supportive. And at one point, they're like, I kept saying, I'd love to pass these ideas on to Sven and Ollie. And they're like, here's a contact. And that opened up the communications. And Starboard's been great. So I can't remember how many years ago that was, 6 years ago or so, that they said, would you like to be part of our dream team? Which to me was a huge honor. I'm like, okay, everyone else is basically 20 years old and made out of rubber. And I'm like in my 50s. So sure. But my particular interest has been spreading the awareness of the SUP as a, serious vehicle for exploring the ocean, with one that should be considered. I think Sea Kayak really has a very strong toehold, right? And I'm trying to let people think about other options and why I consider the SUP a vehicle I want to use, and then make boards that make that type of travel easier for people. And so those have been the two. And I also have quite a strong environmental ethic, and Starboard's just unbelievable with what they do on that front. So, I mean, in my background as a writer, I've shared those type of stories with the major news outlets I write for. So to be associated with Starboard was incredible. So I mean, of course, share their environmental ethic wherever I can. But really, I continue to work with them to see if we can create inflatables and hardboards that can address the needs of expedition paddlers, and the understanding that there's I get letters from people who are paddling inland in Europe, and they're like, we need less rocker, we need a flatter board. And I'm like, people from the coast saying, we need more rocker, more volume. So there's a variety of needs, but Starboard gets it, and they've been great to work with.
So just talking a little bit about the adventure board that you helped design there. So I clearly was thinking about things in a similar way to you, but essentially it's a variation of the Sprint, isn't it? And I thought, well, that's kind of quite an unusual place to start. I was thinking, the All-Star is the board for racing in ocean conditions, but you made a similar assessment, but the Sprint certainly suggested itself as the board that would be best to adapt for adventure. Could you just talk us through that sort of conception and design and that build process?
Sure. So when I approached Starboard with ideas for a serious expedition hardboard, there were kind of like a few primary ideas. So I wanted a dugout area for the luggage or baggage to go. It lowers the center of the weight. It reduces windage, particularly on the bow. If people have big bags on the bow and they've got a crosswind, it can get really hard to control the nose unless you're running down or straight up the wind. So I wanted to get that luggage inside the board, lower it down. I went to them thinking of the All-Star. I was like, look, you've got this incredible pedigree. You've got a board that, just travels incredibly well in these conditions. And I think if we extend the dugout, put the tie downs in the right place, we want to basically get the gear about 2/3 of it to say 55 to 65% in front of your feet, a little less behind your feet, not all the way back at the kick pad, so it's halfway between the handle and the kick pad. You want to be able to step over it and get on the kick pad if you need to, and you don't want it sinking the tail. About all those little kind of fine details, you want a nose that you can hold. So if you're pulling it out of the water in a surf landing, you want a tail you can grab, and a few other things like that. And so they actually were really open to that. And they started, Trevor Tunnington started working with some of their shapers, and they built up those ideas based. They took a 14 by 30 touring board as a base. They took a 14 by 28 All-Star and a 14 by 28 Sprint and started adding foam and testing them and putting weight on. And my thought had been that the Sprint was going to be, the All-Star was going to be the board. But they were really like, Bruce, you got to trust us. The Sprint feels better. We're just the way it can move, the speed you can move this board with at 29.5 wide or 27.5 wide. So when I got it, I was really, they sent a prototype, and I was like, wow, the glide on this thing, the ability to carry a heavy load at a fast speed is incredible. And so that was how that came about. I would say I continue to talk to them about ideas. I think there is a place for a more all-water board, and I think they've done really, really well on their inflatable line, getting the tie downs where they need to be. Like, there's been such a change. You wouldn't notice it maybe just looking at the website, but the new inflatables have just perfect locations for the tie downs and the right number. So I feel we've come a long way there. And the touring line is really, really nice if you're paddling kind of inland waters. The Sprint there's a lot of people who are very focused on kind of speed and those type of days, and it's incredible. But I do think there might be a room for a board that you can just about paddle in anything and load up and downwind and surf landing. And so I continue to throw around ideas with their design team. We'll see where we get to.
Yeah, and I should have sort of spelled out those who are not quite as close to the Starboard range as maybe we are. The Sprint board is traditionally a flat water board. The other observation that I've got around boards, and particularly when you're going from a wider to a narrower board, so maybe an inflatable, a 30 or something, and then you're going down, Starboard shape the underside in a really clever way, in that you can actually trust the board to be able to get back into that sort of upright position. It doesn't take too long to actually get used to it, but it's because of the way that it's shaped that you can actually trust a board width, which intuitively you probably wouldn't go immediately to. So it's, someone described it to me as just trusting the board to do its job and keep you floating, which is a fantastic feature of their boards.
I think it's a great point. If you look at, like, I'm very familiar with the Sprint Expedition. If you look at the underside of that hull, the amount of thought that's gone into where there's just tiny little bits of rocker placed in, where there's a little more bulbous on the nose that's going to allow it to rise over chop, and then it comes underfoot. And they've got a little tiny bit of concave starting to come in. It flows into a thing that's going to create more both primary and secondary stability, and then out into a tail that's going to give you a nice release and keep the board moving. You just think it's the bottom of the board, but they really agonize and are very thoughtful about how the water flows all the way from it when it hits the bow until it releases off the stern. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into that, and how it feels underfoot when you paddle it.
Well, as an engineering physicist or ex, you'll clearly have a few views on that one. But yeah, and just finally to finish off this advertisement for Starboard, I think you mentioned obviously the environmental chops, but Starboard as a company does have a bit of a sort of curious and development and growth mindset, which I particularly it particularly chimes with me, and you can create sort of bog standard sup for the market, or you can really get after that innovation aggressively and that quality piece, which basically keeps people in the market, and obviously that fits with your view of the world as well.
And it comes right down from the top with Sven. I mean, Sven's an unbelievable guy, just a kind, nice, the type of guy you'd want to be friends with, and what he's built there and the kind of ethos that he's brought to it. You're right. Like, I mean, you think of the racing line, you've got an all-star and a sprint, and they're like, well, we can do better. We're going to find a spot for the Gen R. This is the new board they created last year. They're always in the way they've got into downwing foiling boards with the Ace and the Ace Lightning. Unbelievable emphasis on looking for new little niche openings in the market to create super high quality stuff. So yeah, I mean, obviously I'm biased because I've been with them for a while, but I can say when I'm out paddling on the ocean, basically, I was actually talking with a rain gear company the other day, and I was just like, the best thing for me is if I never have to think about your gear. Like if I put it on and I know if it's raining and my float, they make PFDs and I never have to worry about it. And I really feel the same way with the boards I'm on. Like as soon as you're thinking about them, your mind's not dealing with all the other stuff. And so, yeah, I do. Obviously I'm with Starboard, but I wouldn't want to be with anyone else. Let's put it that way.
There you go. So that there ends the advertisement.
The advertisement.
The 10-minute advertisement for Starboard. Just one question which I did want to ask you. You said that you sort of chimed with it fairly early on, and you've got all of this experience across all sorts of adventure methods. So what would you say are the key advantages and the disadvantages of SUP as an expedition tool?
Sure. So I was looking at doing a trip down the outside of Vancouver Island before SUP really came on into the mainstream. That's very committed terrain. Like those are big headlands. There's no roads out there. You're 100% on your own. I thought about it for a long, long time. I got different boats. And in the process of thinking about this, I came across a fellow who was making serious sit on top sea kayaks. And I got in touch with him and he's like, think about it. He's like, if you come out of your boat or when you're going around Cape Scott and you're in a regular sea kayak, you have all these theories about paddle floats and self-rescue and pumps. But if the conditions are bad enough that you came out, you're in a world of hurt right then. And you got a really serious condition. He's like, you come out of this boat, you just crawl back on top and keep paddling. And like this little light bulb went off for me. And I 100%, that's one of the first things I think of when I think of SUP. Like people are always like, oh, the SUP's harder, maybe more dangerous in air quotes. I'm like, oh no. If you have a problem on the SUP, you just jump back on, you're leashed, and you keep going. You need to get on your knees, paddle on your knees for a bit. You need to lie down and prone paddle like a surfboard. You can do that. You have a lot of options. And so I have been less scared in really wide open ocean conditions when, sometimes you commit to something that's maybe more than you meant to chew off. I have definitely felt more comfortable on a SUP than I have in a sea kayak at times on those. And I mean, obviously there's going to be great sea kayakers out there who'll scoff at that and say they can roll up at anything. But I think it's worth thinking about. The disadvantage of the SUP is the windage, right? But you're trying to avoid winds in general on coastal trips. You're going to start early and be off the water early before the thermal winds pick up. To me, the absolute beauty of it is the athletic involvement with the craft. Like, I mean, there's just a difference between standing and paddling this board here. We sit so much of our life. To stand, you see more in the water, you see more across the water. So on the little lake behind my house, since I started taking SUPs out there, I see beavers, otters, rainbow trout swimming underneath me that I would never, ever see in a sea kayak because that angle of incidence of the light in my eyes it was just the water was blind to me. And now I see all that. So out on the ocean, you're seeing everything underneath you. And so to me, there's like that little safety aspect, the athletic kind of just involvement with the craft and the experience. And so, I mean, I really think that SUP in general hasn't done a good job of, I don't know if it's marketing or creating the awareness that this is a viable option. I think it seems overwhelming to people, and I'm really trying to think of ways to break it into bite-sized chunks that you can go out for an overnight, put a couple things on your board, and you can get to a campsite that no one can drive to. It's a pretty special thing. You can just be somewhere for the night and then come back the next day. And it doesn't have to be that you're going out on the open ocean and dealing with swell and all these things. I mean, that can come. But the window's a little narrower than it might be for sea kayaking, but it's not a lot. I think so many more people that are doing it now could enjoy this experience.
Absolutely. And it's about highlighting the breadth and the variety, as you say. And funny you said about the safety element, because I've heard that several times. Obviously, I'm in violent agreement with you, but I heard it first from the race director of the Yukon 1000, who ex-British Army, very much safety focused, and he said they've got lots of paddle craft that go down there, kayaks, canoes and SUPs, and he said he would ideally just have SUPs on that if there were enough people, because from a rescue point of view, you're going down a rapid in, probably the temperature of water you've got down in British Columbia. You want to get out pretty quickly, and and you can obviously do that with a SUP.
It's there was an incident on a lake not far from where I live, about an hour away, where a kid was out on a canoe in April. The lake's cold. He was a university level basketball player, and the boat flipped, and obviously he was in jeans and the wrong clothing, and he drowned. And he died from hypothermia, and it was such a, I guess, eye opener for me, because I supped there the day before, I supped there the day after, and I'm really sensitive, or I think aware of dangers in the environment, but I felt so comfortable in those conditions. Like there was just like I could have gone in kind of quick dry stuff, because I fall off and get back out so quickly. But like you said, you tip a canoe and you're looking at a half-hour swim in cold water. It's completely different. So the SUP does bring a real element of safety, especially in cold water conditions.
So one of the features of your adventure career so far is the joy of sharing it with others, and obviously clear from your partnership with Norm, that's a really great relationship. But also you've gone on adventures with your family and other group, as you said when you went across the empty quarter. So looking at those human relationships, how do you reflect on your adventure experience with others and those sorts of ongoing relationships which have developed? Just talk to me about your relationships and its significance in the world of adventure.
So I guess I would probably at a high level split that discussion between guiding and personal trips. So, when I'm guiding people, to me, that's just a big privilege, a lucky opportunity to share. What's most important to me, yeah, of course, I'm going to keep them safe and do everything I can to make their experience enjoyable. But the more time people spend in nature, the deeper the relationship they get with it. They see things with new eyes. They see more things than they would have seen. They understand more things. And if I can kind of start and accelerate that process for my guests, to me, that's the most valuable thing I can give them. So many people, such a vast majority of our population lead these lives that are quite separated from those wild places. And, when you're with someone who spent a lot of time in the wild, you just know it right away. They see things, they understand the things they're seeing, they'll comment on things, and there's a real beauty to sharing, you both looking out on this world in different things. So when I'm guiding, I'm trying to share that. I think I've always loved personal expeditions. So when I met my wife, she'd never really spent a night in a tent, and the first trip was a 24-day sea kayak up the Canadian coast. And she's done, I think we were 37 days in kayak on the north coast of Borneo. We walked across Iceland, which was another about 40-day trip, and paddled the east coast of Greenland in a folding kayak. So she's an incredible expedition partner, and we really complement each other in our skills. And she loves the wilderness and sees it through her own eyes. So that's been amazing to watch her, that awaken in her. I think fun to, when you're pushing the edge a little bit in expeditions, there's, especially when there's sponsorship involved and people are trying to make money and, or, have a living and maybe write articles. For me, making sure I'm on the same page with safety and risk assessment has always been important. And so when I met Norm, it was just like our assessment of every situation was just so identical and so supportive, because I've been in places where there's like, no, we got to go. Come on, don't worry about that. And it just made everything easier. Like every day on the ocean with Norm, whether we get to where we want to go or not, is a joy. And why else would you be doing this other than to like understand that environment more and have a good time? Yeah, Norm and I try to achieve tough things. It's important to both of us, but it's not important, just in my own personal opinion, in a way that is a bit nutty, that we're going to endanger stuff or make weird decisions. And so, I think, I often think my wish for people doing stuff outdoors is that they could find a partner or a group like that. I've seen it happen with others. I led a trip with Norm in the Broughton Archipelago, and it was all women. They were incredible. One of them twisted her ankle on the first day, and I thought we were going to have to send her out. But she's like, I really want to stay. And we figured out a way to rig a dry bag so she could sit on it almost like a horse in the middle of her sup. And then the other women helped carry her gear and like literally helped carry up to her tent and back down. And they became so close on that trip that that was like 5 years ago. I see them on social media out together doing trips all the time. And that's just such a precious thing. And so, I do a lot of trips. I've been doing trips for a long, long time. I met Norm when I was almost 50. So if you're out there and you haven't found the right partnership, I just think, there are people out there who are like-minded, and it's everyone deserves to have that kind of team. So just keep putting yourself out there and trying things out, and don't go for the biggest trip the first time with a person, but you'll know right away. You'll know within the first hour.
Yeah, it's so critical, isn't it? Particularly when you're out in the wilderness, and as you said earlier on, you don't want any distractions from enjoying the beauty or getting into unnecessary arguments if there's a big difference. So one of the other features of your adventures is your respect shown to the history and the ownership of First Nation, and obviously that applies locally to you. There's a lot of First Nation communities there, but it's also a consistent theme in your other adventures. And I'm reading a biography of Lawrence of Arabia at the moment, so I was particularly interested by your crossing of the empty quarter of Oman. I think William Thesiger route, and this is a route which is so challenging that the Bedouin tribes don't even do it. So it is a difficult route to follow. But you did that in a fully authentic way, didn't you? By and at the time it was the first crossing in 50 years. What is it about immersing yourself in these cultures and the way that other people do stuff which really adds to your experience?
Yeah, the three people had crossed, and Thesiger had been the person before us 50 years earlier, and he was still alive at the time. And we met him in England, in Chelsea, which was incredible. Boy, that ethos that you're touching on is hard to encapsulate, but very important to me. Like there's I've always looked at adventure and, been, I guess, uncomfortable with this idea of just outdoing other people or trying to claim a first. Like, because first is, someone's probably done it before. First is just kind of irrelevant. So what really matters is what you learn and take away from it, and the depth of the history there that can be uncovered, or maybe learned from the local indigenous groups that have been there for a long time. So when we came to the empty quarter, there was this incredible history of Bedouin. There was so little known about that just to me there were all these elements, and I really didn't care if we were like first or last. I just wanted to go and understand. I wanted to learn how to ride camels. I wanted to learn how to speak Arabic. I wanted to become, one with the Bedouin. We were there for 70 days and travel in this really austere environment and understand the incredible adaptions and skills and habits that they had evolved to survive in that. And anything else beyond that was just really superfluous. I just wanted that experience. And so this whole world of social media and I did this or we did that. I'm not poo-pooing on anyone at all. What happened to me, Simon, is I actually went to Everest in 97 with a group, and I felt really strong at the time. It was a Canadian group, and I'd read all Boddington's books, and back then everyone that climbed, right? And I'd been up Denali a couple times, and I was like, I'm unstoppable. I'm great at elevation. I felt really good. That was the year after the tragedy. They had liaison officers at camp. No one was allowed up. There were all types of shenanigans going on in base camp. So in earlier years, there'd be 1 or 2 trips on the south side. There were 18 that year. It's nothing like it is now. But there were people like husbands and wives separating in base camp because they're more concerned about getting to the top. And to me, it was just, I was like, what? If you stand on top of this mountain or you don't, nothing changes, right? It's a pile of rocks. Like it's a process. And to me, the Sherpas were just unbelievable. I was spending so much time with our Sherpa team, and that it was just such a rich reward. And of course, the Himalaya are unbelievable. I was loving the environment, but I came home from that trip and everyone's like, did you get to the top? I'm like, no. And I could just see the disappointment in their face. And so I had to really come to terms with what was important to me in adventure versus what I guess, society and news was and everything. And so I got offered to go back the next year as a climber, but I'd already started planning with my friends that trip across Arabia. And the guy who offered me that climbing position, he's like, what are you doing? Like, do you understand what I'm offering you? And I'm like, I didn't say it, but it's like, don't you understand what we're doing? Like we care about this. Anyways, that was a fork in the road, and I've always followed that path, less traveled. Yeah. And it's not about making a big noise. It's just about trying to learn and share.
And we've had a guest on this season, and he said that about Everest. There is a huge ego-driven element to that, and I guess if you're paying $50,000 to climb it, you'd obviously want to complete that. But people become very goal orientated, and they lose sight of the history and get into the summit fever. And it's a technical achievement and a physical achievement, but it's not really communing with nature. Man against rock. You get up to the top, you come down, and then you're still the same person, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound like the old man or anything, and it's going to sound a little woo-woo, but one of the things that I talk about, I do these corporate talks where I legitimately try to bring some things I've learned to the audience, and this idea that it isn't the accomplishment that changes us, it's everything we did to do that, right? It's the process of, it's a person you became in getting ready to do that thing. And so whether the thing happens or not is kind of irrelevant on the personal development scale. No one can deny you if you're going to put in the work and do the time. Yeah, it's great to get your roses and have this accomplishment, but we all know we're going to do things in our life that work, and some will fail, some won't work. It's not always a reflection of either the skills or the preparation. We have to be humble in the face of Mother Nature if we're talking outdoor expeditions. Certain times it's just not the right time, but the value, the gift is what you do. And I think we'll probably get into this when we talk about just health and training and preparation on SUP, but that process of just doing the little work, the unseen work day after day for a long time, that's a gift, and no one can deny it for you. But I see everyone not wanting to do the work, wanting to get to the top Everest, and I'm like, hey man, that ain't going to change anything. It's everything you would have done to try to make that happen that matters.
Absolutely, and that leads us rather neatly into learning from others, finding mentors to boost your knowledge and learning. And I know that you've spent quite some time with a SUP coach and Olympian Larry Kane, who's done a huge amount of coaching and working with you. And I know that started with an injury. I think you had some pretty severe back problems, and then it sort of went on from there. So how has Larry helped you over the last few years?
Yeah, Larry's been unreal. If you guys don't know Larry, go look him up. He's getting ready to compete in Sarasota at the ICF Worlds here in a few weeks. And so he's been an incredible addition and a joy to my life. I herniated a disc. I was struggling to come back. I wasn't even really able to walk for a while. And I did a fair bit of about a year and a half of my own rehab. I realized I'd built myself back to the point where That's probably back to what I could do before. But I think many of us probably have this weird curiosity about performing at the highest level, right? You see Olympians train, or you see people, and I'd read a book by a fellow called Bill McKibben. Bill's become well known for his work on the greenhouse gas work and 350.org. But he wrote a book called A Year Lived Strenuously, where he decided to train with the American Olympic Nordic ski team. He had a friend who he skied at a collegiate level. He's just like, I want to know what's going to happen to my body if I do everything the U.S. Olympic team does. And he wrote a book about that experience. His father was passing away in the same year. So it was a heartfelt book. Maybe that had inspired me. I was like, I'm just going to, I'm doing well, but I reached out to Larry. He was offering, it was during COVID, he was offering online technical coaching. And I was like, I think my stroke could be better. So we arranged for an 8-week course. I'd videotape myself and we'd meet on Zoom. And at the end of that, I was like, I knew he was coaching Connor Baxter, Seychelles, a whole bunch of top flight athletes who are competitive on the international scene. And Larry's won a couple of Olympics and was second last year at the ICF World Sprint. So I was like, Larry, will you coach me? And he's like, oh, sure. Yeah. I don't really know what he said, and I don't know what we were going to set off into then. We're 3 years into it. Larry has taught me so much about every aspect of athleticism and growth and consistency and doing the work and respecting. I like I joked at the beginning, I was a kid picked last for gym. So for me to use the word athlete, to call myself that, felt like the king with no clothes, right? But now I spend 20 hours a week training, and I've done that for 3 years. It's what I do. I've realized, there's been so much on that journey, but just the idea that we're all capable of a lot, but change takes time. Like I like to say, I feel Larry at some point said, like, look, if you want to work with me, commit to 5 years, because that's how long it's going to take, for you to really feel the water when you're putting the way I want you to feel it when your blade goes in, for me to change how your hips are moving in a really significant way. Larry's been paddling 41 plus years, and he looks at his technique on video every week, and it comes and goes, and he'll have ups. And so he really normalized and humanized that. And, we were talking about paddling that's 12'6" inflatable at 6 kilometers an hour. I think this summer I was paddling my new, obviously a race board and narrower at over 12K an hour. So you're just like, you learn to move. I've doubled my speed, right? I mean, a different board and stuff, but it's been beautiful. And I don't know what the bigger takeaway is, other than, I really am a big believer in the importance of movement. There's so little of it in our lives. It's easy to let it go. And it doesn't have to be a crazy commitment like I've made here. But the thing that, if there's been one thing that's really changed with me and Larry, is every single day I know what I'm doing. We write it down. And if I'm traveling, Larry's like, don't kill yourself. Understand you're going to be tired, but I take it upon myself. Sometimes he's like, Bruce, you do too much, but I don't go to the lounge in the airport. I walk. I put on 15K in like Toronto and 20K in Vancouver. And I'm like, there is a way to move every day. And that's part of my day.
Incredible. So. And Larry is an absolute inspiration. We had him on the show back in the early days, and I think it's about time to have him back on. But what an absolute unit. He's, I guess, similar age to us, sort of in the 50s, but he is absolutely,
he looks like Larry Hamilton. Yeah. And so apart from being physically gifted, Larry's an incredible teacher. And Larry's really been able to transfer from the canoe world. Obviously has had incredible coaching and experience with the canoe paddle stroke. He has taken that and been able to kind of understand that and break it into component pieces and share that with people in a way that I've never heard anyone else do a better job of really enunciating what's happening throughout the entirety of that stroke. And then he'll hone in on the nuances when he needs to, but I would feel really comfortable taking an early level paddler and saying, hey, listen to these 6 points Larry says everyone should do. He's got some great videos on YouTube. And think about those for a while, and so.
Yeah, absolutely. So Larry Kane Canoe, he's all over the social media as well, and some fantastic instruction videos on Instagram this year that I've got sort of saved down. So quite an incredible character.
I really am a firm believer in coaching, and I think a lot of people feel, oh, I don't need a coach, or I'm not good enough for a coach. It's really, really difficult to listen to a video online and then try to have the appropriate awareness of your body while you're doing something as complex as a substroke and analyze it. Even if you shoot video of it, I just can't say enough how important it is to have people support you in the things that matter to you. And to me, it's worth paying for. And of course, we should pay people for that. And I just hope no one out there thinks, oh, I'm not good enough, or it's not. Anyone can benefit from it. And it doesn't have to be a weekly thing, but having an outside person come in and take a look at what you're doing, and the little things I pick up with Larry, from just the attitude I bring. I'm a Nordic skier in the winter. The attitude I bring to the ski stadium every day when I'm skiing, to the idea of quality. Like I do a lot of strength work, and we talk just a lot about the quality of each session and how we want to maintain that. And he's changed so much for me, and I think that. So many people, leave high school or university, and they're like, "Oh, I'm not a sporty type, or I'm not this." We're all humans. We all have a body that moves, and if it's even mildly within your wheelhouse, I just wanted to give a shout out to the idea of coaching in general.
Well, absolutely. We've got lots of people who are joining the sport. The river where I am, there's lots of sort of casual social paddlers, and a lot of people sat down. There's nothing wrong with sitting down, but partly that's a confidence thing, and partly that's a coaching thing. So regardless of whatever level you're at and whatever sort of paddling you want to do or not to do, it is so important to get that instruction. You might not be at the sort of Larry Kane type level, and he is absolutely at the top of the game. Paddle Monster, I think, is his site as well, so all links will be in the show notes through to him. But even your local instructor, it's worth getting a few pointers, and they do it for the love, but they also have a business, so they do need to be paid for that. So I think that's a really important message to pass over.
Yeah, I said one more thing, but here we keep going on coaching. But the funny thing with the substroke is, and I'm sure you see this, it's a thing. I don't want to say that people really need to work their way through a few things. You see people get on, and of course they're just paddling with their arms, and then slowly they maybe learn to stiffen their core and use some bigger muscles. Then maybe they get a hip hinge going. I talk with Larry a lot about, there's this, one of the complexities, just for someone listening who maybe is not aware, like there's very, very few activities where your hips move in one direction, and then in the middle of that stroke, your hips move in the other direction. So basically your hips pull backwards, then you pull your hips to the paddle on this thing called the exit. But everything else in your mind that you've done, a golf swing, throwing a ball, you follow through. You kick a football, you follow through. Like the hips just go in one direction. And so for a sup paddler, just to have someone help them understand that the hips are moving backwards and snapping forwards again while the paddle's in the water, that's not an easy thing. And I mean, you probably see other people paddling more than me, but in 10 years of paddling on lakes and rivers around, I don't see many people who really are paddling us up to the level that they would be capable of. They could all do so much better. I'd love to help them all.
Absolutely, and it does add to the enjoyment, but people don't actually realise it until they do it. There's a huge amount of coordination and balance involved in a sup stroke. So yeah, it's definitely. It's good to see that we're in violent agreement about that coaching journey as well, Bruce. One of the other aspects of adventure, and we've sort of referred to it already, and particularly around the coast, is understanding risk and making effective decisions. And it's a fascinating subject for me anyway, because we assume that we're logical, and we assume that we just get the right equipment or just get a bit of knowledge, then we're fine, and that's the only stuff. But the third piece of the equation is around human factors, which is about being aware of our own illogical behaviours, like, you know, the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is when you don't know what you don't know. And, you know, fortunately this mixes with other effects, mostly testosterone based, you know, like, you know, you don't want to commit a huge sin in society of giving up. You know, you decide to go out anyway, which can lead to disaster. Can you just talk about that missing part of the way that adventure and risk is often seen, and all about making the right decisions?
Oh yeah, that's interesting. You ask. I mean, risk something I think about a lot, and I'll talk specifically about that, and then maybe go to just the bigger stage about personally the ethos I try to bring to the field. But the thing you mentioned about Dunning-Kruger, these things, there's a lot of biases that we are unaware of, and I often talk to health and safety groups about how hugely impactful these are and how many there are. There's something called the availability bias. So this means we'll always think of the easiest thing we can imagine. So the example I use is in the north. I take 12 people out on a 10-day rafting trip. Everyone's thinking about the grizzly bears, right? No one asks about the weather forecast. But if you look in Alaska or the Yukon, 4 orders of magnitude more fatalities due to weather than there are to bears. In fact, there's never been a recorded bear aggression on a group of 4 or more. We've got 10. If we stay together, we can take that risk off the table. But that's what everyone will think of. And so there's many of those. There's a novelty bias that we see things that change quick. We miss the little changes, tides and changing river levels, and so on. There's a lot that come both with experience and with groups. And so experience, you get this kind of near miss bias where when you have a near miss situation, the tendency is to think we got out of it because of our luck and our skills. I see that all the time. And then there's a thing called risky shift, which is when there's 4 or more people in a group. Typically people will offload the risk responsibility to think someone else will say. And so if A didn't say, then I'm not going to say. And so a group of 4 or more will always statistically make less cautious decisions. So I think all of those have to be there, and we're not robots. We don't go out in the wild and go through this list of availability bias and novelty bias. But I think really the people I want to travel with and why I feel great being with Norm or my wife or other friends I do trips with is that we come to wild places with a sense of humility, with a sense of respect for not fear of what could go wrong, but you understand, hey, this is a serious situation. I'm always like, what's the worst thing that can happen, and what's my way out? Yeah. You know, if I can't see the way out, then I need to think about this. And so that's a very lucky thing for Norm and I. We've always been on, we've been making big decisions in situations where we can barely talk and there's winds and foam everywhere. We always are like, if I can sense that he's going to say something or think something, I support it. And you should always defer to the person who's like, I'm not feeling this. Okay, perfect. No questions asked. Let's sort this out. And so, yeah, I think really so much of risk management comes from experience, which can also be dangerous, but risk with experience with humility and finding the right partner. So and just really avoiding that temptation to bite off more than we can chew because it's an ego-based decision, like we started and we can't do it. There's no shame going back to the car or changing the route or paddling less. No one's going to know if you paddled 120K or 80K. It's just irrelevant, right? What's relevant is that you're safe and you enjoyed the experience. So, and those things come with time. They come with time and the right mentorship. Being, if you find someone who you trust and has a bunch of experience, spend time with them, learn from them, because they've obviously got to that place by being in lots of situations they probably didn't want to, and I think they'll be willing to share that.
Absolutely. Not every day is summit day, is it? And what you mentioned about groupthink as well, it's about not being afraid to voice your opinions in a group, and the failure to be able to do that when things again become ego driven, that's can be a real problem. No pain, no gain is not a sustainable strategy for long-term adventurers, is it?
No, and unfortunately, there's a small aspect that glorifies that on social media, and we can see that that kind of ethos, that whatever bro mentality, people can kind of be exposed to that. But I think there's a lot of great role models out there and people thinking really well. Norm and I had said all year we'd been planning to go around Heshquit Peninsula this spring. And a huge storm came and we had to push off our launch. And finally, when we launched, the day we launched, the seas were forecast to be 6 to 8 meters on the outside. That is a big sea. Really 3 meters is the limit of what we see in the summer. So we worked our way through Nootka Sound and then kind of got hammered by surf, just getting into a little bay on the edge. And the next day we snuck through some protected waters. It was still, way overhead by the day where we only had a window to go around. It's a big committed move, about 32K. And it was just white everywhere. And the forecast winds were to build in the afternoon, but it was blowing like 35 knots by 10 in the morning. And we just knew we couldn't go around. We had to go back to where we started. And neither of us felt a sense of disappointment. We're really interested to see what's around the corner. We want to get back there. But I didn't feel less worthy for that, or it's just the way the things rolled out on the ocean that time. So yeah, I'm glad we went and did it.
Yeah, absolutely. And when adventures are often represented, you see the achievement and the grit. You don't necessarily see all of the pre-prep, that planning, that building of experience and knowledge and so on is something that's so critical in these sorts of situations. And I guess also one of the advantages of going with a partner who really understands you is that you've reached those points where you're fatigued together. So, fatigue is another sort of type of time where you tend to make poor decisions. So it's the way that adventure is represented in an honest way, where you're talking about the challenges and the prep, really completes the picture. I was talking to Chris Burtish, who paddleboarded the Atlantic. Now, he didn't just decide to go out and do it and just be bold. He worked up to that over years of preparation in order to be able to allow himself to do that. So you see the headline, but you don't necessarily see all of the work that goes on in front.
Yeah, and I agree. There's years of apprenticeship and learning. You bring a lifetime to it. The thing that I don't think you see is the times when it didn't work. You're like, or the times you decided not to push. And so I think we see these gritty pushes. And so I've done lots of trips with Norm where we pushed really hard, like paddling across Hecate. We got to the beach on the other side. I couldn't stand up. I just couldn't even walk anymore. I was like wrecked. And the next day we found a beach the size of a postage stamp to pull our boards up onto above high tide. But I think when you see that really hard push with a group that's kind of prepared and been experienced, I feel comfortable doing that push when I know everything's aligned and it's the right time for the push. Now, had the conditions been wrong, no amount of pushing would have got us across Hecate. We would have been somewhere else. It would have been a world of pain. And so I think that little magic moment that comes along is when you have the experience, the preparations, the window opens, and then you push really hard and it works. And so we kind of in the retelling of the story or the media see the pushing, but there's a lot of other things that align to create that moment when the pushing took place.
So what's next for you, Bruce? Have you got any adventures or initiatives you can share with us here?
Well, Norm and I are about 2 or 3 years, depending on how we patch it together, away from paddling every single headland on the entire BC coast. So we're weaving it together. That's all the way from Alaska down to Seattle. And so we always go out in the spring and paddle. I take my family to a cabin in the summers, and I've really gotten into pump foiling and wing foiling and just enjoying. There's a little bit of wind there. And so really, personally, I'm on this continuing. I'm about 3.5 years into the journey with Larry. And when I started, I was like, oh, well, I'll go 5 years for sure and see where I get to. Whether that takes me into some racing or not. I've avoided racing only because racing can just carve off this little bit of, for me, paddleboarding is just about this freedom and joy and not organizing and not trying to beat people, but just this. I don't want to. I would love to race a little bit, but I don't want to wreck the experience. So I haven't done any. Who knows where that'll go. And I'm working with Starboard on a few new initiatives. And those type of projects take a long time. Things have to be tested and prototyped and whatnot. But we're in the pipe, seeing where some things might come out the far end. And so, in a sense, more of the same. But that's a beautiful thing. It's just more of this process that of trying to become the person you want to be, who can do the things that you want to do. So basically, just a little bit stronger every day if I can.
Cool. Well, thanks, Bruce, so much for your time today. We've discussed lots of the contributions you made to the adventure world, and you've got 3 great best-selling books out there. If anyone listening has any gifts to buy or any inspiration required, all links to Bruce will be in the show notes, and please follow Bruce Kirkby on social media and keep up with his adventures, and follow his training paddles in the spectacular waters of British Columbia. In the meantime, Bruce, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a great chat, and hopefully see you on the water.
Yeah, Simon, thanks so much. I look forward to our first paddle together.